You're not supposed to hear this. For centuries, a religious elite erased names, burned pages, and silenced voices that spoke of something far too dangerous for the pulpit. The kingdom of God isn't in temples, it's inside you. This isn't a theory. These are real gospels, hurriedly buried in the desert by monks who refuse to obey an imperial decree. Texts where Jesus doesn't repeat commandments. He laughs at sacrifices, exalts the inner light, and whispers truths that would make any bishop go pale. You were raised on the crucified Christ. But what if the real one taught that resurrection isn't flesh coming back? It's consciousness igniting now. There's a reason they buried this. These Gospels speak of silenced apostles, a forgotten divine mother, and a God far greater than the throne of creation. Ideas like this aren't lost, they're executed. These words survived the flames. Will you survive the truth?
When historian Elaine Pagels examined forgotten microfilm reels at Princeton, she discovered something more vivid than the grainy images suggested. The 13 Nag Hammadi codices, copied in Coptic and rescued from Upper Egypt in 1945, had remained restricted to a handful of specialists for decades. As she leafed through the pages, Pagels found echoes of a Christianity that escaped the textbooks, discourses on inner light, metaphors of spiritual rebirth, and dialogues with divine wisdom. The challenge was bringing this material to the general public without sacrificing academic precision. To break the silence, Pagels chose a simple label: Gnostic. The word made headlines, but also sparked controversy. Philologists point out that the Gospel of Thomas differs from the Gospel of Philip, and that the tripartite tractate discusses cosmology in Platonic terms. Still, the title stuck because headlines depend on brevity. The label didn't invent the diversity, it merely exposed it. The codices reveal that the 2nd century harbored various spiritual currents competing for Jesus' legacy. The next question inevitably arises: why were these books buried? Pagels turns to the Easter letter of 367, in which Athanasius of Alexandria lists acceptable writings and condemns the rest. With imperial support, monks copied the canon and planned to burn everything else. The codices show charred edges, cut margins, and were found just yards from St. Pachomius's monastery, evidence of a destruction interrupted at the last moment. Reasons for such zeal were plentiful. In these pages, Jesus praises self-knowledge, calls the divine a maternal-paternal principle, and promises that the attentive disciple will become one with the light. Saying 3 of Thomas summarizes the inversion: when you know yourselves, you will understand that you are children of the living God. The sacred no longer depends on external hierarchies, but emerges through inner investigation, shifting religion's center of gravity. Since Irenaeus of Lyon, critics of these texts have argued that emphasis on spirit would threaten bodily resurrection, and that dispensing with authorities would erode community cohesion. In the 4th century, while Nicaea ratified the Son's consubstantiality, the administrative machine financed by Constantine standardized which books would be copied. The official New Testament took shape, while competing voices survived only in hostile quotations, until archaeology recovered the complete picture. In the Gnostic Gospels and Beyond Belief, Pagels demonstrates that these manuscripts articulate reflections on gender, still considered progressive today. The feminine figure of wisdom, Sophia, suggests less hierarchical communities. It's no wonder that holistic spiritualities see a lineage in the codices. A longitudinal study by psychologist Lisa Miller at Columbia University, published in 2021, indicates that introspective practices reduce depression by up to 30% in young American adults. The practical application fits modest routines: 5 daily minutes of conscious silence, a dream journal to capture recurring symbols, reading groups for the Gospel of Mary, accompanied by discussions about active compassion. Remembering that heresy means choice, heresis, helps frame the topic. Early Christianity resembled a marketplace of arguments. Historian Bart D. Ehrman observes that the winning faction gains the right to narrate history. Archaeology gives the microphone back to the defeated. The same dynamic resurfaces on social media, where algorithms elevate some voices and suppress others. Controlling information flow remains a theological, political, and economic dispute. Study of the codices advances with multispectral imaging capable of resurrecting faded ink. In 2023, researchers in Oslo read on a previously illegible page from the Secret Book of John a glossary linking Hebrew terms to Platonic ideas, proof of broad intercultural dialogue. Digital humanities platforms already publish these high-resolution images, allowing students to participate in transcription. Each recovered fragment shows that faith's history is more labyrinthine than linear. In the monasteries of Upper Egypt, the year 367 marks a turning point. An Easter letter from Archbishop Athanasius of Alexandria arrives with the imperial seal and proclaims that only 27 books are worthy of public reading. Any other text is dangerous. The injunction wasn't mere advice. It implied armed enforcement sponsored by Constantine's treasury, now used as an instrument of doctrinal uniformization. The monks of the Pachomian Federation knew many prescribed volumes by heart. Among them, collections in which Jesus declares, "Split a piece of wood and I will be there," or recommends discovering the light hidden within each person. The margins of these codices showed signs of use, side annotations, small holes from leather studs, and, in several cases, charred edges, suggesting earlier destruction attempts. Codicology studies examining Codex Sixt confirmed the presence of 2 leather cases to reinforce the spine and heat stains on the papyrus, evidence that the object was pulled from a fire at the last moment. Faced with the threat, the community opts for a low-profile, high-efficacy solution: seal part of the library in a clay jar, climb the limestone slope bordering the valley, and bury the container in a discreet cavity. The strategy resembles the modern practice of encrypting a sensitive file. Both trade visibility for survival. Success is proportional to risk. Centuries later, the same pages nearly turn to ash again. Oral accounts confirm that some fragments of Codex 13 served as kindling before antiquities dealers reached the village. The spared codices contain a theology contrasting with nascent orthodoxy. Alongside conventional baptismal formulas appear visions where the divine is called Mother-Father. Female disciples receive full authority to teach, and salvation is described as integration with inner light. Such statements don't deny bodily resurrection, but shift emphasis from public ritual to direct experience. In practice, this weakened the thesis that only bishops can mediate access to the divine, the same thesis that, reinforced by state patronage, would sustain ecclesiastical power for centuries. Physically analyzing these books reveals as much as their content. Most are single quire papyrus notebooks wrapped in flexible leather covers. Technically, this allows standing while reading, vital in the desert where tables were scarce. Recent research from the early history of the Codex project showed that Codex Sixt maintains internal leather strips, stays, preventing spine tears. The method was common among Coptic artisans and explains the collection's good structural preservation. New tools continue returning ancient voices. In 2024, a team in Oslo used portable hyperspectral scanning to capture nearly erased inks on papyri protected by glass frames. The technique, combining hundreds of wavelengths, allowed reading accent marks inserted in the 4th century and distinguishing between carbon and iron gall inks. As this data uploads to public databases, students anywhere can now test transcriptions in real time, something unthinkable 2 decades ago. Why does this story matter outside academic circles? Because it touches the perennial question of where authority and spiritual experience reside. Neuroscientific research led by Lisa Miller at Columbia University shows that regular contemplative practices are associated with thicker cortex in regions linked to emotional resilience, a finding so relevant that in 2024, the White House itself recognized spirituality as one of public health's 4 pillars. By rehabilitating texts that celebrate self-knowledge as a legitimate path, the Nag Hammadi episode offers a historical mirror for current debates about well-being, integral education, and freedom of belief. The term heresies derives from Greek heresis, choice. Labeling a writing heretical means declaring an alternative illegitimate. In the 4th century, such decisions involved imperial edicts and bundles of wood for burning books. In the 21st century, they involve algorithms that amplify or silence content in digital feeds. In both cases, the question persists: who defines the limits of what's admissible? As drones map new caves in the Nile Valley and machine learning software trains to reconstruct missing lines, the possibility of even bolder texts emerging can't be dismissed. In Mark chapter 4, verse 11, the evangelist lets slip a detail that usually gets glossed over in homilies. Jesus distinguishes 2 audiences. To those close to him, he delivers the mystery of the kingdom of God. To the rest, only parables, showy stories that hide rather than reveal. The same script appears in Paul's pen when he writes to Corinth that he offers hidden wisdom meant for the mature. The message is clear as desert sun. There's reserved material, a second level of teaching that the canonical New Testament mentions but doesn't reveal. We lacked discovery of where this collection rested until, in 1945, Upper Egyptian peasants broke a clay jar and 16 centuries of silence. Opened, the Nag Hammadi codices sound like a microphone switched on backstage in early Christianity. Right in the first line, the Gospel of Thomas warns, "These are the secret words that the living Jesus spoke and Didymus Judas Thomas recorded." No cushioned parables, the text goes straight to what was whispered behind closed doors. In saying 13, Jesus challenges the group, calls Thomas aside, and whispers 3 words so explosive the disciple goes mute. Colleagues pressure for details, but he refuses to snitch. A few pages later, saying 108 throws gasoline on the theological fire. "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me, and I will become that person." The promise doesn't point to paradise in some afterlife future. It offers immediate fusion with the divine, here and now. If only this text had reached us, it would already cause an uproar. But it came accompanied by writings that further complicate the line of succession Rome intended to crystallize. In the Gospel of Mary, for instance, Mary Magdalene relates a private vision. Peter reacts with sarcasm. "Did the Savior speak to you secretly and not to us?" Levi cuts the debate short. If he considered her worthy, who's going to contest? The scene shows that in certain communities, women occupied center stage spiritually, something the future male episcopal leadership wasn't willing to legitimize. As these echoes fit together, the backdrop of the Great Purge emerges. In the Easter letter of 367 AD, Archbishop Athanasius of Alexandria nails down the number 27 and declares any book outside the list a threat to faith. The decree didn't come naked. It brought the imperial seal and the armed force of the state that Constantine had placed at the church's service. A monastery keeping visions where God is called Mother Father, or where heaven fits inside the chest, risked seeing its parchments reduced to charcoal. This prospect pushed Pachomian monks to hide their books in a limestone ravine. The still charred edges and hastily torn bindings reveal that the act of burial wasn't romantic but strategic, a race against the fire. What exactly in these texts justified such fear? First, they redirected religious authority. If the divine already dwells within each person, the priest loses the monopoly on intermediation. Next, they undermined ritual control. When salvation is described as awakening consciousness rather than a sacramental ticket, no altar can charge a toll. Finally, they corroded gender hierarchy. A God described in feminine-masculine polarity toppled the patriarchal engineering tightened in the councils. No institution, even blessed by imperial treasury, stands unscathed after hearing that its keys lock no door. The persecution, however, couldn't muffle everything. When the jar broke in the 20th century, entire pages became kindling in clay ovens before antiquities dealers realized the gold mine. To this day, fragments of Codex Josephum circulate in Swiss vaults, far from academic scanners. Is it coincidence that the most delicate pieces, precisely those speaking of gender equality and direct communion, were the first to vanish into the black market? The question hangs, and the more specialists rummage through private catalogues, the more suspicion grows that collectors are interested in keeping certain sayings out of public domain. Meanwhile, modern science approaches, unwittingly, the ancient insurgents. Research led by Lisa Miller at Columbia Associates, contemplative practices with greater cortical thickness in areas regulating emotional resilience. When Thomas suggests enlightenment happens in splitting wood, in an everyday gesture, it may not be just metaphor. Mindfulness physically modifies the brain. In labs, experienced meditators show less reactivity in the limbic system when facing stressful stimuli, giving empirically verifiable flavor to the ancient promise of inner peace. Anyone wanting to try doesn't need incense or Latin. Simply, for 1 week, before any significant decision, close your eyes for 2 minutes and ask, what part of me already knows the answer? By the experiment's end, it's almost inevitable to notice simpler, more accurate choices, as if the inner logos whispered pocket advice. Another home experiment inspired by saying 22 proposes, listing an intrapersonal conflict, ambition versus serenity, for example, and imagining a situation where these forces work together. The exercise usually reveals solutions no self-help manual proposes, perhaps because the solution, following the underground gospel, was never external. Skeptics will say this is all esoteric poetry, but even the admitted gospels suggest veiled material existed. Paul speaks of inexpressible words, heard in the third heaven, and Matthew justifies using parables as a way to hide content from the unprepared. At this point, the question is no longer whether there were secret teachings, but who controls memory's vault. Vatican libraries, Coptic archives, and private collections form a triangle of silence where textual treasures may be resting. If another jar emerges from the desert tomorrow, the world will see the 4th century dilemma repeated: publish everything and risk doctrinal earthquakes, or lock the door again and pretend the whisper never existed. In the late councils, the phrase, "I believe in the resurrection of the flesh," became a cornerstone clause. It was simple, tangible, excellent for processions full of relics. After all, a body that returns whole authorizes kisses on bones, pilgrimages to tombs, and sermons reminding the faithful, without church, no Easter. Except that among the scrolls hidden in Nag Hammadi, a small treatise sent to a certain Reginos challenges this staging's logic. What will rise? Asks the author, and immediately cuts the suspense. Not this flesh, but that which already lives within you. For him, resurrection isn't a posthumous spectacle. It's an ongoing process that dissolves the body's rigidity and converts it to light right now. The same spark appears in one of the sayings preserved in the Gospel of Thomas, where it says, "The disciple only enters the kingdom when what's outside becomes equal to what's inside and the high equals the low." In another passage, Jesus' voice guarantees, Whoever drinks from his mouth will become him, and he will become that person. No grave opens, no angel rolls any stone. The change occurs through intimate combustion, as if a hidden spark ignited the entire interior of the human being. For the leadership erecting basilicas, such declarations were pure gunpowder. The Easter liturgy depended on the palpable corpse that Thomas touches with his finger, and the stations of the cross that make the faithful relive suffering's anatomy. If victory over death happens in consciousness's silence, the altar ceases to be a mandatory passage. No wonder Athanasius of Alexandria, in the famous Easter letter of 367, stamped exactly 27 books as safe and called all others danger to souls, a message delivered with the emperor's seal and his officer's sword. There was reaction. Some monks buried entire libraries in the Egyptian desert, preferring clay jars to episcopal bonfires. Others tried to argue. More erudite bishops called the inner vision Greek fantasy, but ended up tripping over the New Testament itself. The Apostle Paul speaks of a body sown corruptible and raised incorruptible, spiritual. Origen went further, suggesting the glorious body would be as subtle as thought. He paid with censure but left the question hanging. Where does flesh end and light begin? Centuries later, science reignites the debate. Studies led by Lisa Miller at Columbia University show that contemplative practices are associated with greater cortical thickness in areas linked to emotional resilience, an effect that significantly reduces depression risk. It's not proof of metaphysics, but suggests that when texts speak of inner illumination, there's measurable biological correspondence. What if this resurrection is a mental state change that leaves marks on the brain? Near-death experiences offer another puzzle piece. The Aware-2 research, coordinated by Sam Parnia, recorded organized brain activity in patients during resuscitation, and nearly a fifth reported vivid perception of light and lucidity, while monitors announced cardiac failure. What name to give this interval when consciousness seems to float outside the pulse? Could it be a glimpse of the same body of light that Reginos heard mentioned? Practical application doesn't require incense or Latin chants. 3 daily minutes of silence, focused on the point where breath meets the sensation of presence, suffice to notice that noisy thoughts lose strength. Within weeks, many people report clearer decisions and less irritability. An anticipated mini-Easter, no need for empty catacombs. Who's to say this isn't, at minimum, a draft of resurrection? However, there are interests at stake. If passage to full life depends on self-knowledge, what value remains for rituals sold in candles and masses? It's no coincidence that part of the scrolls remains missing in private vaults. What secrets do these fragments still out of public reach guard? And who decides when to release them? History shows that whenever a new fragile text emerges, some power structure trembles. Reimagining resurrection as conscious flame, lit even before the heart's last beat, shifts faith's axis. Instead of awaiting a cosmic judge at time's end, the human being finds an invitation to recognize already participating in a reality with no expiration date. For authorities governing through fear of final judgment, this conclusion remains dangerous. The question, therefore, isn't whether these ideas will resurface, but how many doors will still open when the next clay jar breaks the desert's silence. When imperial councils fixed in the creed the formula, "I believe in God, the Father Almighty, and in His only Son," the discussion about who speaks for God seemed settled. Centuries later, however, the Nag Hammadi codices tore the silence and let escape a feminine voice that crosses time like thunder. In thunder, perfect mind, this presence declares, "I am the first and the last. I am a wife and a virgin." This isn't peripheral poetry, but a divine self-definition that unites opposite poles to show that being source doesn't fit a masculine label. Those who listen carefully perceive the statement corrodes at once two orthodoxy pillars: the exclusive image of heavenly paternity and the hierarchical chain resting on it. Another piece of the same mosaic, the trimorphic protonoia, reinforces the blow. I am the mother, the voice, the image. Here, wisdom, Sophia in Greek, Chokmah in Hebrew, echoing ancient proverbs, doesn't just model the cosmos, she whispers truth inside each seeker. Rabbinic tradition already spoke of the Shekinah accompanying exiles, but the library buried in the desert takes a step further. It places the mother at the salvific drama's center, as thinking and nurturing principle enveloping everything. If God also speaks with maternal tongue, what sense remains for pulpits barred to women? The Gospel of Philip, likewise rescued at Nag Hammadi, offers a metaphor escaping Sunday school. Christ would have come to repair the separation between high and low, a task compared to a mother's work, uniting bride and groom at a feast. The maternal figure isn't supporting caste. She seals the marriage of opposites that later theology fragmented into abstract doctrines. Read carefully, and you'll understand why 4th and 5th century episcopal circles saw in these paragraphs a threat greater than any Roman persecution. The spark intensifies when Mary Magdalene appears. In one of the sayings preserved by Thomas, Peter complains she isn't worthy of life. Jesus responds he'll guide her to become male, a word meaning whole there, integrated, not masculine. Far from erasing the feminine, the passage crowns Mary as example of integrated humanity. Whoever overcomes inner division exits the power game, measuring worth by gender. The same echo resonates in a little-known dialogue with Salome, where Jesus identifies himself as he who exists from the undivided, inviting her to see her own origin in the same luminous unity. This may sound like exotic mysticism, for bishops who, in 325, decided only men could teach, it was theological dynamite. It's no coincidence that later councils, like Laodicea's, formally prohibited any feminine ministry. By erecting exclusively masculine altars, the institutional church created barriers making half the ecclesial body invisible. The Coptic scrolls, however, remind us history could have followed a different path. A Christianity where the mother's voice was part of liturgy, where wisdom was celebrated as much as logos. Imagining this alternative helps understand why Egyptian monks buried leather jars on hard-to-reach cliffs. It wasn't just about saving rare texts. It was a silent declaration that the divine can't be walled in masculine pronoun. The impact goes beyond archaeology. Religious psychology research, like that led by Christina Cleveland and Lisa Miller, shows believers cultivating maternal divine images register less social anxiety and greater empathy. It's not doctrinal proof, but suggests that lap theology, the one affirming "I am your mother," modulates inner experience measurably. In times of mental health crises, recovering this symbolism isn't mere academic whim. It can be low-cost therapeutic resource. The simplest practice consists of dedicating 2 daily minutes to imagining wisdom enveloping the chest with golden light, breathing until perceiving the heart rate calm. Those who try for 30 days usually report deeper sleep and less defensive reactions in family discussions. Also worth noting that Sophia's return aligns with global women's rights movements. When synodal conferences debate, in the 21st century, whether female priesthood wounds tradition, the codices respond with ancient laughter. Real tradition was plural, and amputation came later. The political weight is enormous. Who controls the word consecrates moral priorities, distributes community resources, decides which bodies can speak in heaven's name. Reintroducing the mother in theology means redistributing power, something no institution likes doing spontaneously. Some fear this rescue ends in groundless syncretism. However, As historian Karen King reminds us, traditions were always more porous than school manuals admit. Nag Hammadi monks read Isaiah and Plato in the same sanddrift, and nobody exploded because of it. The problem isn't mixture, it's monopoly. Diversity only frightens those maintaining privileges based on uniformity. Ask yourself then, what social changes could bloom if pulpits, classrooms, and parliaments heard the alternating round of father and mother? How many political dogmas about work, motherhood, sexuality would fall if divinity itself united what centuries of culture separated? Perhaps most disconcerting is realizing this revolution doesn't depend on new archaeological discoveries. It would suffice to read, translate, and disseminate what already escaped the dunes. Each line where Sophia confesses, "I am knowledge and ignorance," dismantles purity certificates. Each dialogue where Jesus calls a woman to center removes bricks from the wall, separating authority and welcome. If this seems subversive, it's because it always was. The difference is now more people have access to the open vault. By restoring the mothers' and daughters' voices, forbidden scrolls don't offer just historical curiosity, they offer a mirror capable of revealing how much present inequality still feeds on a half-faced divine image. And mirrors, as we know, tend to break silences that neither councils nor decrees managed to bury. When the Nag Hammadi scrolls surfaced, few passages sounded as scandalous as those uniting Jesus to Catechism's most hated symbol, the serpent. In the Gospel of Judas, the Master laughs at disciples still offering lambs in Holocaust and fires. The God accepting these sacrifices isn't my Father. It's corrosive laughter, directed against logic trading blood for forgiveness. Next, Jesus leads Judas to a high point, has him look at the cloud glowing from within, and reveals that this world's ruler will be undone. The sentence puts on the table an antagonist little known outside Gnostic circles, the Demiurge, a cosmic craftsman with strength to mold matter, but no access to ultimate truth. The idea reappears in the hypostasis of the archons, a Genesis rewrite inverting heroes and villains. The earthly creator, convinced of being sovereign, forbids knowledge's fruit. The serpent, described as the wisest of creatures, whispers to Eve that nothing there is poison, it's a key. Eve eats, offers to Adam, and becomes, according to the text, her partner's illuminator. Instead of temptation, the gesture becomes the first act of intellectual resistance. Whoever seeks knowledge unmasks the lie of a lesser God, demanding blind obedience. Later, Jesus himself identifies as the luminous serpent, fusing in himself the liberator's role and reptilian symbol that Sunday sermons labeled satanic. For theology consolidating in Rome, this sounded like cosmic insult. Official faith depended on the image of an absolutely perfect creator before whom humans must bend knees. If Christ himself suggests this God is just a mediocre administrator, a universe clerk unable to see beyond the clay he manipulates, all sacramental architecture loses height. After all, why offer animals, why fear eternal punishments, if the supposed supreme judge is just a caretaker maintaining bars around a planetary prison? The metaphor's strength lies in repositioning the moral center. In canonical texts, Judas is villain because he sells his friend for coins. In Coptic codices, he becomes confident, the only one understanding that Jesus' physical death will break the Demiurge's dominion. There's no glorification of betrayal, but rather the suggestion that real scandal happens when the institution prefers temple order, with its smoking altars, to inner brilliance needing no gates. The lingering question is uncomfortable. How many times throughout history has the Church kissed political power's whip to keep alive a God demanding sacrifices, while silencing any narrative where divinity subverts the visible world's thrones. The Apostolic Fathers perceived the risk and reacted ferociously. Irenaeus of Lyon catalogued serpentist sects as devil cults. Hippolytus joined the chorus, citing only the most incendiary passages, silent about pages speaking of inner peace and radical compassion. This selective strategy ironically saved the works. By describing them in anti-heresy treatises, polemicists provided clues now, allowing combination of crumbling Coptic fragments with once-lost Greek titles. Who would have thought? The Burning Crusade generated the index sustaining modern academic reconstruction. But why the serpent? In Mesopotamian myths, the Ophidian symbolizes healing and renewal, shedding skin as rebirth sign. In Augustus's Rome, Asclepius's staff wrapped by the animal already represented medicine. By assuming the emblem, Jesus doesn't embrace absolute evil. He claims the luminous side of an ambiguous figure capable of contradicting authorities, selling ignorance for security. Practical consequences appear immediately. If salvation depends on overcoming this world's ruler through Gnosis, inner knowledge, nobody needs to buy indulgences or pilgrimage to stone sanctuaries. The temple becomes metaphor, and cult currency loses value. This displacement continues producing shivers in power structures. In a world where governments and corporations prosper by controlling information, affirming there's divine spark unreachable by institutional walls sounds subversive. Consider regimes censoring books or platforms blocking sensitive content. The logic hasn't changed much since bishops ordered manuscripts buried in the desert. The coincidence raises suspicion. Did official theology choose to defend the Demiurge, material order, in exchange for political relevance, selling as dogma what actually preserves the status quo? A concrete example is fitting here. Every time a child asks, why? In sequence, why this, why that? Exasperated parents' close conversation with authoritarian, because I said so. The Demiurge, in Gnostic account, is the because I said so father, limiting curiosity to maintain dominion. Awakening the luminous serpent would mean refusing the empty answer and continuing to dig until finding firm ground. For adults, the exercise can take form of a journal. Note, for 1 week, every order received without clear justification, and ask what authority guarantees this command. Sometimes, the simple act of questioning reveals the grid painted invisible. This doesn't mean denying the physical world's value. For Gnostics, matter is good while serving as consciousness's laboratory. It becomes prison only when a false god decrees nothing exists beyond it. Here's where the serpent shines again. It slithers through dust, but its skin gleams under sun, reminding that learning from earth doesn't prevent aiming at sky. The luminous Ophidian's mysticism doesn't demonize the body. It denounces the lie, declaring body an end in itself. What remains, therefore, is the interrogation reverberating from Judas to neuroscience labs. What if the true betrayal was never a garden kiss, but centuries of silence imposed on voices pointing beyond the visible? Each rescued Coptic fragment returns an uncomfortable mirror. Perhaps fear isn't of the serpent itself, but of the possibility that knowledge, the forbidden fruit, frees human beings from chains carefully decorated with hymns and incense. Refusing to look at this mirror may keep liturgy intact. Facing it, however, launches the challenge of recognizing that divinity, when speaking, sometimes prefers the wisest animal's sibilant tongue to the altar sacrifice's obedient reverence. If this narrative touches something in you, a practical step is worthwhile. Every change begins with understanding your role as co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. To facilitate this access, we've developed a set of audio guides leading to the elevated consciousness state described in these ancient texts. Want to try? Click the link on screen or in the comments for immediate access. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me,"